You've been reading Sun Tzu wrong your entire life. Everyone has. The strategists, the executives, the military academies, the motivational speakers quoting ancient wisdom. All of them miss the point. The art of war isn't about winning battles. It's about not going bankrupt trying. Sun Tzu wasn't a mystical warrior philosopher contemplating the nature of conflict. He was a financial risk manager trying to prevent kingdoms from collapsing under the weight of military spending. This isn't a book about heroism, honor, or martial prowess. This is a treasury management manual, a cost-benefit analysis framework, a guide to avoiding fiscal catastrophe through strategic resource allocation. It's accounting disguised as philosophy. And the fact that we have spent 2,500 years reading it as military theory instead of economic warning is exactly why empires keep making the same mistakes. Why superpowers bleed themselves dry in distant conflicts. Why the wealthiest nations in history collapse under military overreach. Sun Tzu saw war for what it actually is, an extraordinarily expensive investment with terrible returns. Every chapter in his book, every famous quote you've heard, every principle cited by generals and CEOs, they all point to one conclusion. War destroys wealth faster than any other human activity. And if you must fight, do it as cheaply and quickly as possible, or your kingdom will implode from the cost. This is Sun Tzu's actual message. Not know your enemy, not all warfare is deception. The real lesson is much simpler and much more brutal. Every day your army is in the field is a day your economy is bleeding. Calculate the cost or face bankruptcy. Let's follow the money and see what Sun Tzu was really trying to tell us. China, approximately 500 BCE, the Warring States period. 7 kingdoms fighting for supremacy across what would become China. Constant warfare, shifting alliances, millions dead over centuries of conflict. History books teach this as a period of military innovation and political intrigue. They're not wrong, but they're missing the economic reality underneath. This wasn't just warfare. This was an economic crisis spanning generations. Each kingdom was spending itself into oblivion. Armies required food, weapons, transport, pay. The logistics of fielding tens of thousands of soldiers consumed national budgets. Farmland became battlefields. Farmers became conscripts. Production collapsed while military spending exploded. This is the context Sun Tzu was operating in. Kingdoms weren't losing because their generals lacked courage or their strategies failed. They were losing because they ran out of money. The wars were bankrupting everyone simultaneously. The rulers saw this as a test of strength, honor, and will. Military glory justified any cost. Victory demanded sacrifice. These were the assumptions driving centuries of conflict. Sun Tzu looked at the same situation and saw financial suicide. He didn't care about honor. He cared about solvency. His question wasn't, how do we win? It was, how do we survive economically while pursuing victory? Because here's what the honor-obsessed rulers didn't understand. You can win every battle and still lose the war if you bankrupt your kingdom in the process. Military success is meaningless if your economy collapses. Conquering territory is worthless if you can't afford to hold it. Sun Tzu's genius wasn't tactical. It was financial. He understood that warfare is fundamentally an accounting problem. Your kingdom has limited resources. Every soldier deployed is a farmer not producing food. Every weapon forged is metal not used for plows. Every battle fought is wealth destroyed. The rulers saw military spending as necessary investment. Sun Tzu saw it as potentially catastrophic expense that needed ruthless cost management. The same conflict, viewed through completely different lenses. And his solution wasn't to fight better. It was to fight cheaper, faster, and whenever possible, not at all. Because the only war you can truly afford is the one you don't have to fight. Let's talk numbers. Real costs. The arithmetic Sun Tzu was actually working with. He writes, when the army ventures far from home territory, for every 20 miles traveled, 100 units of grain are lost. This isn't philosophy. This is logistics calculation. Distance equals cost. Time equals expense. Movement burns resources exponentially. 1,000 soldiers require a certain amount of food daily. 10,000 require 10 times that. March them 100 miles from home base, and you need supply lines. Those supply lines need guards. Those guards need food. The farther you go, the more resources you spend just maintaining the army's existence before a single battle occurs. Sun Tzu calculated that for every soldier fighting at the front, you need multiple people supporting logistics in the rear, transporting food, making weapons, producing replacements. The ratio could be as high as 20 support personnel for every frontline soldier. This means a war isn't just expensive because of combat. It's expensive because of the entire economic structure required to sustain combat operations. Every day in the field multiplies costs geometrically. Now understand his famous principle. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Everyone quotes this as profound strategic wisdom. It's actually brutal cost-benefit analysis. Fighting is expensive. Protracted warfare is catastrophically expensive. The longer conflict continues, the more it drains your treasury. So the optimal outcome isn't glorious victory through battle, it's achieving your objectives through means that don't require sustained military operations. Deception costs less than armies. Diplomacy costs less than sieges. Bribing enemy generals costs less than fighting their armies. Intelligence gathering costs less than reconnaissance in force. Psychological warfare costs less than actual warfare. Sun Tzu's entire strategic framework is built on cost minimization. Every tactic he proposes, every principle he advocates, comes back to the same calculation. What achieves the objective at lowest economic cost? This is why he emphasizes speed. In war, speed is of essence. Not because fast armies are more heroic, but because prolonged campaigns are more expensive. Every additional month in the field is another month of logistical costs, another harvest disrupted, another season of economic damage. And this is why he dedicates entire chapters to espionage. Spies seem like a minor tactical consideration. For Sun Tzu, they're fundamental to the entire economic model of warfare. A spy costs almost nothing. Training, maintaining, paying a spy is trivial compared to raising an army. But good intelligence allows you to avoid costly mistakes, prevents ambushes that destroy expensive forces, identifies enemy weaknesses that allow quick victories instead of prolonged sieges. Spending on intelligence is investment in cost avoidance. Every dollar spent on spies potentially saves thousands on military operations. Information is capital efficiency. Knowledge reduces risk. Espionage provides return on investment that battlefield heroics never can. This is Sun Tzu's actual philosophy. War is too expensive to conduct poorly. Calculate everything. Minimize all costs. Strike only when the math guarantees success at acceptable price. And, whenever possible, win without fighting, because that's the only victory that doesn't risk bankruptcy. He wasn't teaching honor. He was teaching survival through fiscal discipline. Fast forward 2,500 years. Has anything changed? Have modern superpowers learned Sun Tzu's lessons about cost management and economic limits of warfare? Absolutely not. They've made exactly the mistakes he warned against, repeatedly, catastrophically. And they're doing it right now. Vietnam, 1965 to 1975. The United States didn't lose Vietnam militarily. American forces won virtually every major engagement. The Viet Cong couldn't match U.S. firepower. North Vietnam couldn't win conventional battles against American technology and air superiority. But Sun Tzu didn't measure victory by battles won. He measured it by cost sustainability. And by that metric, Vietnam was exactly the disaster he warned about. The war cost $168 billion in 1960s dollars. Adjust for inflation, over $1 trillion. For what? To prevent South Vietnam from falling to communism, which happened anyway the moment U.S. forces withdrew. The conflict dragged on for years. No clear objectives, no exit strategy. Just continuous expenditure of resources for unclear benefits. Meanwhile, the costs mounted. Not just financial, but economic. The war contributed to inflation, diverted resources from domestic programs, created political instability. Sun Tzu's principle, prolonged war destroys the state. Vietnam didn't destroy America, but it marked the beginning of economic problems that persist. The fiscal discipline that defined post-war America broke. Deficits became normalized. The era of American economic dominance began its slow decline. Afghanistan, 2001 to 2021. 20 years. Over $2 trillion spent, thousands of American lives. Tens of thousands of Afghan lives. Result? Taliban back in control, exactly as they were in 2001. By any Sun Tzu analysis, this is catastrophic failure. Not because America couldn't win battles. U.S. forces dominated militarily for 2 decades. But the cost was unsustainable and the objectives were never achievable at acceptable price. Sun Tzu explicitly warns, there has never been a protracted war from which a nation benefited. Afghanistan proved him right. The economic drain weakened America. The opportunity cost was staggering. $2 trillion could have rebuilt American infrastructure, could have funded education, research, development. Instead, it went into a conflict with no strategic victory condition. Iraq, similar pattern. Military success, strategic failure, economic devastation. Trillions spent, thousands dead. Iraq more unstable than before invasion. Iran, the supposed enemy, strengthened by removal of its rival. These aren't military defeats. These are failures of cost-benefit analysis. Failures to calculate the price of objectives before committing resources. Failures to understand Sun Tzu's fundamental principle. If you can't win quickly and cheaply, don't fight. Now consider modern cyber warfare. This is the closest thing to actual Sun Tzu strategy in contemporary conflict. Cyber attacks cost almost nothing compared to traditional military operations. A team of skilled hackers costs less than a single fighter jet. But they can disable infrastructure, steal secrets, disrupt economies. Russia interfering in elections through social media campaigns and hacking. China stealing intellectual property through cyber espionage. These are Sun Tzu tactics. Low cost, high impact, minimal risk, maximum disruption. Achieving strategic objectives without firing shots. This is what he meant by subduing the enemy without fighting. You don't need armies when you can collapse their financial systems. You don't need invasions when you can steal their technology. You don't need occupation when you can create political chaos from abroad. The nations still fighting conventional wars are playing Sun Tzu's game wrong. The ones winning are the ones who realize that modern conflict is about information, economics, and cyber capabilities, all of which cost infinitely less than tanks, jets, and soldiers. So what's the lesson? What does a 2,500-year-old Chinese military manual teach us about modern life, business, and power? First, everything is economics. Every conflict, personal or national, has a cost. Resources spent on confrontation are resources not spent elsewhere. Time invested in fighting is time not invested in building. Energy directed at enemies is energy not directed at growth. Sun Tzu would ask, what's the return on investment of this conflict? Can you achieve objectives through cheaper means? Are you calculating all costs, or just the obvious ones? Is victory worth the price you'll pay? Most people never ask these questions. They fight because they're angry, because they feel disrespected, because they want to prove something. They spend resources, time, energy, relationships on conflicts without calculating whether it's worth it. Sun Tzu would say that's how you lose, not just battles, but everything. You can win arguments and lose relationships. You can win lawsuits and lose businesses. You can win wars and lose empires. Second, the best victories are invisible. When you achieve objectives without confrontation, you preserve resources. When you outmaneuver instead of overpowering, you avoid costs. When you use information instead of force, you multiply efficiency. In business, this means market positioning over direct competition. In negotiations, this means creating alignment over demanding compliance. In life, this means choosing battles ruthlessly based on strategic value. Third, speed and information are the ultimate competitive advantages. Both reduce costs. Both increase probability of success. Both allow you to accomplish more with less. Sun Tzu obsessed over these because he understood that prolonged anything drains resources faster than humans can sustain. Quick decisions, rapid execution, continuous information gathering, these aren't just tactical advantages, they're economic necessities. And finally, the biggest warning, imperial overstretch, the pattern where powerful entities expand beyond their capacity to maintain expansion, where military or economic commitments exceed the resources to sustain them, where the costs of maintaining power exceed the benefits of having it. This has destroyed every empire in history. Rome couldn't afford to defend all its borders. The British Empire bankrupted itself maintaining global dominance. The Soviet Union collapsed under military spending it couldn't sustain. America is walking the same path. Military bases in over 80 countries. Defense spending exceeding the next 10 nations combined. Debt levels unprecedented in peacetime. All while infrastructure crumbles, education declines, and economic inequality expands. Sun Tzu would recognize this pattern instantly. Overextension, unsustainable costs, resources flowing to military ventures while the domestic economy weakens. This is how superpowers fall. Not through military defeat, but through economic exhaustion. The best war is the one that doesn't bankrupt you. The best conflict is the one you avoid. The best victory is the one achieved at lowest cost. This was Sun Tzu's message 2,500 years ago. We're still not listening, and we're paying the price he predicted. We follow the money to show you what victory actually costs. Now I want to hear from you. In conflict, what matters more? Raw power or strategic intelligence? Can you afford to win every battle, or is avoiding the fight the real victory? Drop your answer in the comments. Power or intelligence?